What's up, YouTube? Wanted to make a video today to discuss a scientist who has recently changed his position as to whether or not aliens have visited his planet. So the guy's name is Dr. Garry Nolan. He is a researcher, a scientist, and I believe he's a professor at Stanford University. The guy has a bachelor's in biology and a PhD in genetics. He also analyzes and studies samples of alleged UFO crashes. I believe he's been doing this for about 10 years or so. So yeah, the guy definitely has his credentials. What I'm going to show you is a clip from the Lex Fridman podcast. He was on Lex's show last year, just talking about, UFO and aliens. Lex Fridman's podcast, I highly recommend. It's really good. From what I've seen, he usually brings on lots of scientists. I believe Lex works at MIT, if I'm not mistaken. Someone can fact check me on that. But yeah, he's pretty good. It's an entertaining podcast. If you're really into tech and military and science, definitely a podcast I recommend. But anyways, I'm going to show you a clip from the podcast of last year, and then we're going to talk and discuss about another clip that was more recent. I believe it was last month, and you can see how his position has changed.
You've also looked at UFO materials. You are in possession of UFO materials yourself.
Claimed UFO materials.
Alleged you.
Now notice he says claimed UFO materials, alleged UFO materials. Dr. Nolan is not taking a stance or making an assumption, hey, these are alien materials I'm studying. Hey, I'm studying non-human origin materials from a spacecraft. He's saying none of those things. He's saying these are alleged. Just keep that in mind when you listen to this.
UFO materials, that's right. So, what's another term? Weird materials that don't seem to...
They have a story.
They have a story that doesn't seem to be of natural origins, but it's not, there's a process to proving that, and that process may take decades, if not centuries, because you have to keep pulling at the string and discover where they could possibly come from. But anyway, you're in possession of some materials of this kind. Can you describe some of them, and maybe also talk to the process of how you investigate them, how do you analyze them?
Right, so let's say that there's two classes of materials that I've been given by people, and they're not given by like the government or anything, just given people who've collected them, and there's a reasonable chain of evidence associated with them that you believe is not just a pebble somebody picked up off a road. There are almost always things that people have claimed have either been dropped off as like some sort of a leftover material, molten metals, or they are from an object that was released from this that kind of exploded. They're almost always metals. I have some couple of things that might be biological that are interesting that I haven't really spent a lot of time on yet. When you look at a metal, you basically, what are the elements in it? And what's it made of? And so there's pretty standard approaches to doing that. Most of them involve a technology called mass spectrometry. And there's probably about 5 or 6 different kinds of mass spectrometry that you could bring to bear on answering it. And they either tell you, depending upon the limit of the resolution of the instrument, they either tell you the elements that are there, or they tell you the isotopes that are there. And you're interested not just in knowing whether something is there or not, you're interested in knowing whether there the amounts of it, and in the case of elements, how many different isotopes are there? And that's kind of where, in some of these cases, it gets interesting, right? Because in at least one of the materials, as we first studied it, the isotope ratios of, in this case, it was magnesium, were way off normal. And I just don't know why. It doesn't prove anything. All it proves is that it was probably accomplished by some kind of an industrial process.
Now I'm pausing this again because I just want to make something clear. Notice he's still being objective. He's still taking a neutral stance. He's just reporting the data. He's not jumping to conclusions or making false assumptions. Hey, you know what? I'm giving these materials a study. In this one example, excuse me, the isotope ratios of magnesium were off normal, abnormal levels. Again, no conclusions. He's not saying, "Oh, it's aliens." He's just reporting the data that he has. And those in the scientific community, I'm sure, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm pretty sure this is how it works. You don't jump to conclusions. You need to gather as much data as possible. You don't want to make any false assumptions. And he's not doing that. He's just saying, hey, this is what it is. It is what it is. So keep that in mind as you continue to listen to this.
Whether it's the result of a process or whether, and this is sort of the leftover, or whether it was made that way for a particular purpose, I don't know. All I know is that it was engineered. That's it, right? But then the question is sort of, you go one step deeper. Why would you engineer it?
Right. Well, why engineer? What does the engineered means? There's all kinds of. It could be a byproduct. It could be the main result of an engineering process. It would be a small part of the engineering process that is the main part.
Well, so the ratios of isotopes for any given element are basically the result of stellar processes.
So I fast forward a little bit in the clip, but he further talks about the samples that he was studying from an alleged UFO crash in Brazil. I think the crash happened in the 1970s. Someone in the comment section, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong or just let me know, but I believe that's what he's discussing.
In money these days, as a counterfeiting tool, you basically embed certain ratios of isotopes in to make it harder for counterfeiters to accomplish. But other than that, we don't do anything with that. So why would you make grams of such material in this one case and drop it around on a beach in Brazil?
So which case are we talking about?
This is the Ubatuba case.
Can you describe this case a little bit further? Like what material we're talking about, just the full story of the case?
So
this is an interesting one.
It's an interesting one. So a fisherman saw an object that released something, or it exploded, and it was this I've got some big chunks of it, relatively pure magnesium, with obviously something else in it because magnesium burns. So it had something in it that would, other metals, simple alloy, that would prevent it from basically burning up. And so the question is, and so then we had two pieces that came from two different chains of custody, both claimed to be from the same object. At least physically, when you look at the two things, they look the same, right? So we took small fragments of each of them. We put them in an instrument called a secondary ion mass spec, which is an extremely sensitive instrument. And it can see down to 0.0001 mass units, which is important for, let's say, more arcane reasons, but it's a sensitive instrument. And so one of the chains of custody, we had two pieces from the same chain of custody, and then two pieces from the other chain of custody. One of them had completely normal magnesium isotope ratios, magnesium 24, 25, 26, and the other was off. Not just like slightly off, way off, and they were both off to the same extent. So, it was sort of like you had an internal control of what was normal, and you had this other one which was wrong. And so you're left with it's kind of an open question. Was this a hoax? Were these two chains of custody, one of them a hoax, that somebody purposefully introduced those things? Because you could do it. It would cost a lot. I mean, at the time that this was found, I guess the 1970s or so, might have been earlier, I forget. the amount that I had would have cost several tens of thousands of dollars to make. And again, it's not something you would just throw around. And why would you do it in the hope that some guy 30 years from then would pick it up and study it?
Yeah, it's a very subtle draw.
It's a long-term plan. So I just don't know. I just don't know what to make of it. Except it's interesting. So a different kind of question that you're asking is what constitutes evidence, right? So is this sufficient evidence? Absolutely not. But somebody's put it forward. I have the time. It's my time. I'll study it, and my objective is to sort of take those that I think are credible enough and do a reasonable analysis, put it out there, and maybe somebody else will come up with an idea.
And so that's very interesting. Again, notice he said, is this, does this constitute evidence of aliens or, extraterrestrials, non-human aircrafts on space or from space landing on our planet? Absolutely not, right? He's just saying, hey, it's just interesting data. I'm studying it, and it is what it is, right? So keep that in mind when you hear this. Again, I believe this podcast episode was recorded in 2022. I want y'all to just keep this in your head when you listen to his views on UFOs and aliens. Now, the next clip I'm going to show is from a recent talk that he had, I believe, at a forum in May, May of this year. So just see how much his stance has changed after that. Okay, so now here's the second clip. This clip is taken from, I believe, the iConnections forum in New York. This happened last month. And yeah, just listen to what he says. I believe SALT is some sort of forum that focuses on like technology, public policy, and I think finances. But again, this is 1 year later. Dr. Garry Nolan, he's about to be asked, have aliens visited Earth? And listen to what he says.
Do you believe that extraterrestrial intelligence has visited planet Earth?
I think you can go a step further. It hasn't just visited, it's been here a long time, and it's still here. And it has basically, people talk about the wow signal, looking for extraterrestrial intelligence. The wow signal is that people see it on an almost regular basis. That's the communication that's already here.
And that statement seems so incredible that it's tough to believe, right? Like, people hear that, and maybe a lot of people hear that, and they don't believe it. And so I'm curious, if you had to assign a probability to that statement, that you believe extraterrestrial intelligence has visited this planet, what probability would you assign?
100%. And that's not just my opinion. I mean, look, the National Defense Appropriation Act, passed last year, signed by Biden in December. 30 pages of that is the establishment of an Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Office, the establishment of looking into the harm that's happened to any of a number of the individuals, going back to 1945 and looking at the disinformation and misinformation that has been basically articulated over the decades. 12 U.S. senators have signed on to a document that basically says we want the information. The establishment of an office, ARROW, in the Department of Defense, has 25 people working in it right now. And what's their goal? Collecting the information across all of the U.S. Department of Intelligence or Department of Defense intelligence offices, and collation of that into a uniform format for the very first time, and provision of that then to Congress. The creation of a whistleblowers program specifically that allows people from within, I'm going to say this, who've been working on the reverse engineering programs, reverse engineering of objects, so that they can come in and break their oaths, but it's specifically just to talk to Congress and give that information in classified settings. And that the most recent one that happened was just last weekend, and it created quite a hornet's nest in Washington.
So within 1 year, his position has went from uncertainty to 100% certainty that aliens have been on our planet. And notice he even mentioned reverse engineering of UFOs. Now, where have we heard that before? Bob Lazar, back at, I believe, in 1987, 1989, when Bob Lazar made the claim that he had to reverse engineer a UFO and that the government had 9 UFO crafts. And now we're seeing this information being pushed out to mainstream media more and more. And I find it interesting that this forum was last month, and what have we seen within the last few days? We've seen a whistleblower make the claim that America has alien crafts and possibly even seen alien bodies, dead pilots of these alleged crafts. So it's just interesting times that we're living in. So I just wanted to share this with y'all and see what you think. Do you think this is credible? Do you believe Dr. Garry Nolan, or do you think this is a disinformation campaign? Some people have said that this is a disinformation campaign. This is all a hoax by the government, pushed to create some sort of distraction. I would imagine the skeptic community is more than alarmed from hearing all these claims. We talk about having evidence, substantial evidence. Unfortunately, the evidence that Dr. Garry Nolan has seen and some of these other researchers have seen, we are not going to see because it's not made available to the public. But please like and subscribe and share your thoughts.